Hello. You are listening to Above Paranormal Network. You can learn more by going to aboveparanormal.com. This is Talking to the Dead with Fred, and this is our first episode. This episode is about childhood fears. My name is Fred, and I'm a psychic medium. I'm based in San Antonio, Texas, and basically what I do is I help to connect people with loved ones that have crossed over, and I facilitate that mostly through channeling, but I also hold seances and teach spirit communication. And then I own Curious Twins Paranormal, and that is a ghost tour company. But we just want to take a moment to welcome everybody to the show. We're glad to have you. But this show that we're going to be starting, called Talking to the Dead with Fred, is all about discussing topics with the paranormal. We have 6 main focuses for the show, and the first one is going to be talking about spiritualism, the religious practice of talking to the dead. And then my life as a psychic medium, I love to get questions. I'd love to try to answer questions to help people. So you guys, throughout the show, you are welcome to send me questions via email at CuriousTwinsParanormal@gmail.com, and I'll be answering those on air at later dates and try to get everybody's questions asked, and I will also respond back to you guys via email. The third thing that we're going to be talking about on the show are hauntings and ghost stories. And then our fourth thing is untold history and mystery. We love to share that. We love to share history and mystery with people. And then we're going to be talking about current trends within the paranormal community. And we will also be, from time to time, having special guests on our show and sharing special topics. So I think we'll have a lot to share with you, and we're really glad to debut this show. This is our very first one. So first thing is I'd like to say happy October 1st to everybody out there. Let's get spooky and start this show. So today, as I said earlier, the show is really about what haunts us from our childhood. What were our fears during childhood, and how does that even play out today? And I have with me as a special guest my husband and co-owner of Curious Twins Paranormal. This is Stephen Garza Guzman, and I'll be interviewing him today. So welcome, Stephen. It's great to have you. We're glad that you're here. How are you doing?
I'm doing great.
Awesome.
Great. Yeah, I'm having a really good day so far, and it's October 1st, so this is a time when all of our spooky people can be themselves, and a lot of the closeted spooky people come out. So I'm just really excited about what this month has to offer for us.
Oh, great. Well, let's get talking. Stephen, can you tell me a little bit about yourself, please?
Sure. Yeah. So I am a paranormal investigator, but I'm also a writer. I am a photographer, graphic designer. I guess I'm a jack of many trades, but master of none. But my main, thing that I do with all of the skills that I have, I guess I'm looking at storytelling, but also learning new things. So I'm always learning, and I'm always trying to tell stories through my craft.
Well, thank you so much for that, Stephen. I have a lot of questions, so I want to get started with this little interview. So, Stephen, when did you first become interested in the paranormal?
Yeah, I think I kind of grew up a weird kid. I was always kind of into spooky things and scary movies and gothic literature, and I was just always fascinated by these things. And so I think as long as I can remember, I've been into the paranormal and exploring the paranormal.
Great. Well, thank you. As a child, can you remember things that used to perhaps scare you?
Yeah, I think I grew up, I was the youngest, a little bit more about me. I was the youngest of 4 boys. So I was the baby of the family, and I was treated as such. So I was also known to be kind of a sensitive kid, and a lot of things kind of scared me. I was afraid of, while I loved scary movies and things like that, I enjoyed them so much that I would just scare myself. It would just happen all the time. And then also, I had these weird anxious fears as a child. I was afraid of letting people down and disappointing people. So I just was I grew up kind of afraid of a lot of different things, and I of course kind of grew out of those things as I've grown older.
Cool, cool. Well, Stephen, many kids are afraid of what or who might be in the closet. What do you feel the closet is? Why do you feel that the closet is associated with ghosts, monsters, and even the paranormal? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I think, it goes to that fear of the unknown. Like, what are the things that we don't know what's lurking in the closet, It's a fear of darkness. And I know when I was a child, I was always kind of afraid of what was lurking in the closet. And I think there's a lot of really interesting metaphors that you can get with, like, the skeletons of the closet, or being afraid of what's in the monsters in the closet and things like that. And so I think that really resonates with a lot of people. It's that fear of the unknown, fear of what might be looking or staring at you while you're sleeping. At least that's what I felt growing up.
Yeah, for sure. I think, even in the LGBT community, that term, he or she is in the closet, or I came out of the closet, I think it represents much more than, I think the literal, but also kind of, what it is that we hide, like you're saying, what the skeletons are lurking in the closet. And I think that often that really explores the deep side, the dark side of who we are as humanity. And I think that can be, I think that in itself can be super scary. I really identify with the closet. And, as a child, kind of one of the first things that kind of led me to kind of think, I'm a psychic medium, it was dreaming of my great-grandmother's death. She died when I was around 4 years old. So from the time of about 3.5 years old, I was actually having dreams that she was going to die, and it was really weird. I remember in a dream I would wake up from being asleep, and I would walk over to my grandparents' bedroom. I'd walk over to the bedroom and I'd open their closet. And as soon as I would open the closet, I would see my great-grandmother, and I knew that it was my great-grandmother, and she was looking at me, and she was waving at me. And but the thing about this vision that I had was it was a completely, like, super neon lit closet, and she was a skeleton. And I just remember her just waving at me, and all these people in the background, like, dancing and doing all these weird things. And I kind of had this feeling of knowing that she was going to die. And it was really weird because I knew exactly when she was going to die, how she was going to die. And I think I even vocalized that to my mom. I think she thought, I have a really overactive imagination. And as a kid, I was really interested in, of course, ghosts and the paranormal and death and dying. And I think to people's surprise, what happened was I was right about her death. And it's just really interesting that all came out of the closet. But it wasn't necessarily this negative experience for me. It was this, like, really awe-taking, breathtaking moment of kind of like this, like, seeing another world. And that was really my first glimpse of it. And it was literally at that point where, I think my mom was like, okay, either this kid is, like, onto something, he sees something, or he's just really strange. And perhaps the truth is both of them are a little bit true today.
Wow. That's really interesting because, I think if I were to experience something like that, I would be just terrified, even as an adult, seeing something like that. And it's interesting that you say that it wasn't a negative experience. And I think that a lot of people maybe hearing that story might think that's odd or interesting that it wasn't negative. It was kind of a positive experience for you. Why do you think that was? Or
it was just really beautiful. Like, I guess it was this understanding that death in itself wasn't necessarily this horrible, dark thing, but, when I had this dream, it was bright and vibrant, and there were skeletons dancing. It was really kind of incredible to see that and to experience that. And I don't think, I really loved my great-grandmother. I kind of had an understanding. I was really young, though, but I was really able to accept her death much easier because I had that vision. I think it was just a like a cool way to understand death from a very simple standpoint. It wasn't a really concrete vision, but somehow at the age of 3.5 to 4, I really knew what it meant, and I'm really grateful that I had that, because that's really what started the whole thing. For me, being a psychic medium, and after she did die, exactly how I predicted, she started visiting me, and she visited me so many times growing up, and I don't often get visits from her anymore, but I still do get visits from my grandparents who have since died, and I still get visitations from a lot of spirits that were important to me growing up. So I've never associated necessarily the closet with being something just truly scary.
Sure.
But perhaps even a safe place.
Wow. Yeah.
So were you actually afraid of the closet? Do you think? Do you still have any of that fear if you did?
Yeah. So I mean, I do remember not so much being afraid of the closet, but it was really more the darkness that was in the closet, or what was lurking in the closet. And I do remember being really young and just like kind of staring, just like looking into that darkness, that abyss, and thinking, what's in there? Is there something in there that's looking at me? Is there something in there that's trying to talk to me? So I also remember, just as often as I could, closing every closet or every door that I had, just so that I could avoid those thoughts. Because if I had the door open, then it would open up all of these thoughts, and they would just be running through my mind, and it would be hard for me to go to sleep, and I would just be like terrified at like 2 a.m. just thinking about all of the things in the closet. But then also, you talked a little bit earlier about like closets as metaphors for the LGBT community. Like, yeah, definitely growing up, like particularly in like my middle school years and high school years, that like coming out of a closet was a big fear for me. So I think it's interesting to think about how closets kind of go with us as we grow into an adult, and what that means for us, and the fears associated with that.
Yeah, I think horror movies do a really good job of somebody hiding in the closet, these kinds of things, and that being impressionable upon us, like especially when we're alone, we're living alone. But I think earlier you had mentioned to me that your brothers used to like to scare you.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, definitely the youngest of 4, and all my brothers are also much older than I. So they just loved to scare me. That was like a big thing. Like they would be hiding in the closets, and they would jump out and scare me. Like one of my my most vivid memories are of my brother Joe coming out of the closet and screaming, "I'm the leprechaun!" like from the Leprechaun movie. And like looking back at that movie now, like it's not even that scary, but I remember just being terrified of that as a child. And so that was another reason why I wanted to have all the closets closed, was because I thought, maybe my brothers might be lurking in there trying to scare me. So every time, and I remember there's also a laundry room, like in the main hallway of my home. And I always tried to go past that room really, really fast, because I thought my brother's in there or something's in there. So it was both a fear of like the paranormal and what I had seen in the movies, but also the very real fear of just being startled by my brothers. So that was something that I grew up with, and I kind of had to deal with.
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of movies, like you're saying, the Leprechaun and that jumping out and those kind of things, that kind of link us to seeing what kind of monsters or demons are in our closets. So as far as monsters and demons, what are your thoughts of things that could be hiding into that closet?
I think like when I was a child, I was very much affected by like the scary movies and the scary stories that I encountered. And I thought that, every haunting was an evil haunting, and every ghost was an evil ghost. And so naturally, a lot of people have very negative experiences whenever they have a haunt. And so thinking about like monsters in the closet and demons and things like that, like I think now if I were to experience a haunt where, you know, I was hearing voices or noises coming from a closet, I wouldn't necessarily jump to that conclusion just based on our experiences. I think, you know, what we try to do as a company is also educate people about, you know, being a little bit more open-minded about haunts, and that it's not going to be a demon or a negative ghost necessarily. You know, you want to try to understand first before you jump to the conclusions.
Yeah, you know, I think there's a lot of, you know, paranormal shows, Ghost Adventure, those kind of things, that jump to this conclusion, oh my God, this is a demon. And, you know, I tell people very, very frequently that, you know, whenever you may or may not have had a, you know, adverse reaction to a spirit, you know, I really kind of look at it as that, you know, in life sometimes we meet amazing people. We meet people who we want to have drinks with, we want to have lunch and we want to go out with. We make friends. And then sometimes in life we meet super crappy people, people who we'd like never to see again.
Yeah.
And I kind of think that like has a lot to do with the way we look at things. And I think like growing up, you know, that brings me back to this understanding that the closet was never scary to me. I think, you know, I thought that perhaps in some ways the closet symbolized hope. Hope that there was something that could go beyond that closet, something, you know, like almost a new realm. And I think I really loved growing up the book The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, because it was like going into this, you know, this wardrobe, this closet, and then ending up in this magical place. And I think that for some reason, you know, that has left this like impression on me that there's both good and bad, and understanding that as a child, understanding and deciphering what's good and bad, and what's good and bad to ourselves is really, really interesting and beautiful and almost raw, like a raw subject. But, you know, I really think C.S. Lewis did a really good job of introducing children to this concept of the battle of good and evil. And then I really like, you know, when these kids have these crazy experiences in the closet, they talk to the professor that they were staying with, living with, because they had been evacuated from London due to World War II. They expected the professor to tell them, you know, that they were crazy, that they were in trouble. And in fact, he said that it was logical. Logical that there could be 101 things in a closet and time might not exist there. I just thought that was really, really amazing. I think, you know, as a child, to look at that kind of wonder and to even look at it as today, perhaps that really is a key and a light to hope that perhaps the paranormal can give us both as a child and as an adult.
Definitely. Sure.
Yeah.
I love that.
That was good. So what about under the bed? You know, did you ever have a fear of what might be lurking under your bed?
Yeah, you know, that was another one of those, like, what's lurking in the darkness type situations. But I was very much, you know, driven by, like, that fear was very much driven by horror movies. You know, you have Poltergeist with the clown under the bed. You have Pet Sematary with the little boy with the scalpel cutting the guy's Achilles heel from under the bed. Like, those were things that were really terrifying to me, you know, just like thinking about these things waiting for you and about to either hurt you or pull you under. And that was just like, I remember jumping from the bed to like a little bit further just in case that somebody might be under there going to reach for me and pull me under. I even remember there was like an urban legend that I had heard that really, really freaked me out. And it was, there was a woman who, it was kind of a routine for her. Whenever she woke up in the middle of the night, she would put her hand under her bed where her dog would be sleeping, and the dog would lick her hand. And it was just something that she would do every night, and she would just be kind of reassuring for her to be safe, feel safe.
Sure.
And then there was an instance where she felt that, and she put her hand under the bed, and the dog licked her hand, so it was normal. And then she woke up the next morning, and I may be even telling the story differently, but This is how I remember
Sorry.
it. And so she wakes up and she sees, she goes to the restroom and she sees her dog like hanging in the shower, and it's all bloody and it's dead. And she goes, like, she runs back to her room and she sees written in blood in the mirror, people can lick too. And that was
Terrifying.
so terrifying. And I mean, we talk about this all the time about how, you know, we do investigations, and sometimes it's really people that you have to be afraid of. And a lot of people ask us, are you afraid of spirits and things like that? And it's really not so much spirits, and it's really more, you know, what are humans capable of that scares me. And so that's why that story really resonated with me. And I always thought, oh my God, am I going to wake up in the middle of the night and there's a serial killer under my bed just waiting for me? And so that was something that was really, really kind of terrifying. And so, yeah, I would always jump from my bed onto like a further part of the floor so I wouldn't get pulled under or cut or anything like that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You know, like, if anybody knows me, you know that I'm probably terrified of roller coasters and these kinds of things. You know, and I think that has a lot of association, not just with what's under the bed, but with the dark, you know, what is in the darkness. So, you know, I think both kids and adults, you know, they tend to have fears of the dark. You know, they tend to have fears of what they can't see. Just like on that roller coaster, you know, you can't really see when it drops all the time.
Yeah.
And so, you know, were you ever afraid of the dark?
Yes. Yes, the answer is yes. Yeah, I remember being afraid of the dark as a kid. I still sometimes am afraid of the dark, and it was both a mixture of that fear of like weird things in the dark, maybe an entity or a spirit, but also what if somebody broke in the middle of the night and I don't know about it and they're just waiting for me to come out and they're going to stab me? You know, that I felt a little bit more older as I got older. But when I was a child, I remember just always being afraid of the dark. And my mother would get after me because we had to, you know, have our electricity bill really low. And so I would be the one to get in trouble because I would leave the lights on all the time because I didn't want to have any lights off. And so I had to get to a point where I would be able to turn the lights off before I go to bed in all the house because I was usually the one late at night awake. And so what I would do is I would turn the lights off and run, like sprint from wherever I was to my bed, jump on the bed and get under the covers and make sure that nothing would get me. So that was like a very real fear that I had. And then getting older, you know, it wasn't so much about the paranormal. It was really about like somebody's breaking into the house and they're going to kill me. But now every once in a while I will wake up in the middle of the night and, I mean, you know, our house is haunted.
Yes. Yeah.
We experience many spirits in our home. And I will be awoken suddenly from a noise, and then I'll think, you know, what is that? And I get a little bit afraid from my bed, and so I'll kind of like look around the room, see if there's anything there, and just trying to fall asleep and forget about it until the next day. So yeah, the darkness is something that I think scares a lot of people. Like I think that it really is that fear of the unknown, fear of what's lurking, fear of somebody else being there with you without your permission, I guess. Like,
yeah,
it really is kind of the idea of giving somebody permission or not giving somebody permission, or somebody violating
or
you.
something.
Yeah, or something violating you or your privacy. Like that is a very real fear that a lot of people have.
Yeah, for sure. You know, growing up, I was super afraid of the dark. You know, and I would usually have kind of my interactions with spirit. Like spirit would visit me at night, and maybe that's because in the day there was constantly, you know, people around me. There was always my grandparents or, you know, my mom or an aunt or somebody. There was always somebody around me, and so I think that, you know, I just kind of was able to ignore like hearing, seeing spirit a little bit more. But when I was alone at night, that's when I would get spirits that would come and talk to me. And most of them were completely innocent, but like, you know, if you think about 4 or 5, and there's strange things in your room that you don't know, that you didn't ask to be there, that violating of permission, it's really, really alarming. And I remember one Christmas, I asked for, like, it was like the top of my list was a flashlight, and I wanted like this huge, huge flashlight. But I thought that would make me really, really safe. And I think that over time I learned to deal with spirits and to kind of deal with how they would visit and how I would communicate. And I think at first I was so afraid growing up and having that kind of gift that I would kind of just ignore them or just stare at them. And when I got a little bit, older, I guess, I began to talk to the spirits. I began to question them or ask why they were there. And it was a lot easier for me to deal with. And eventually I really didn't need the flashlight. But it's kind of funny because, I did mention roller coasters earlier and that stuff. But my favorite roller coaster, I'm not a big fan of roller coasters at all,
Yeah.
But my favorite roller coasters are ones that are in the dark, like inside of a building. And perhaps it's because I've become more comfortable and almost feel safe with darkness that surrounds me. And perhaps it's this idea that we become the light with asking, with questions, with speaking, with trying to find information. I think that's really something that draws me personally to the paranormal because, I kind of think that gives us just a little bit of hope, of understanding, and the idea that we physically can be the, we can be the light in our own world and in our own realm. I think that's really, really interesting. We still have several questions, but there are a couple of questions that are coming up on the chat board. And so I want to address a couple of those. So, Donald, you've asked, any signs of cults or witchcraft in your area? Yes, this is San Antonio. San Antonio is super, super haunted. We're one of the oldest cities in the United States. We're celebrating 300 years, and we always tell people that we have a much older history. We have at least a 10,000-year-old history, and indigenous people practice all different kinds of things. And when Mexico, owned Texas, where we're at now, we see this blend of culture that believes in both light and dark magic and occult practices. And I grew up with the idea of curandísimo, or Mexican folk healing, as something that was very substantial. And so if you got sick or somebody looked at you weird, your grandmother, your abuela would be like, oh, just get the huevo, get the egg, rub it on you, and you're going to be fine. But that's a very common thing in San Antonio is using, these occult practices that really it's just a form of healing. It's a form of Mexican folk healing that has been used. And the idea of using the huevo or the egg is simply a kind of a vessel that this works at to abstract negative energy. But we utilize these things, all the time, and, I get a lot of calls about investigations and tours and stuff like that, where, people are concerned about the occult practices or demonic natures and these kinds of things. And, I really kind of have to remind them that, it's part of our culture to clarify things and explain things. But I think, many cities in America, many places in the world have these things that occult practices that are still part of our culture and our traditions. And like with curandísimo, it's kind of a blend of Catholicism and other things. Some of them Islander things, some of them Native American, some of them, from all over the place. But definitely, being San Antonio, those have been practiced for a very long time. And when this was Mexico, those were practiced then. Indigenous people had different spells and different things that they would use in the area too. The common word here in San Antonio that we use for kind of a spell or a way of taking care of things, if you need to get pregnant, if you need to avoid, going to jail for something, we do a trabajo, and that, like, that idea is meant to be helpful and not necessarily dark, but here in San Antonio and other places in Mexico as well, that darkness is something that's also utilized. So I thought those are just really great questions, and I think those fit in with the topic of childhood and an understanding of that. I think it's not uncommon for many young people in San Antonio, especially our Latino community, to have have a grandmother who practiced at least some form of curandísimo, lit the candles or used the web or the A. Those things were very, very much part of our childhood. So thank you, Donald and King, for bringing that out. But there's definitely a lot of that. And there's even ties, with the history of the Alamo and those kinds of things, to occult practices and fraternal organizations and those kinds of things within the city, with all different kinds of fraternal organizations. So we've definitely had that as part of our culture and our history for a long time. There's a really special hotel that's right behind the Alamo, and the hotel is called the Crockett. And the Crockett Hotel originally was an International Order of the Odd Fellows hotel and lodge, which it was thought that they practiced forms of the occult in there. And it is definitely a very haunted hotel. And it's one that we often take people on our tours to. So these are some really great questions. We really appreciate it. But we have still more of our interviews to do, so we're going to jump on those questions right now. Stephen, why really are you interested in the paranormal? What motivates you to pursue the paranormal? Why does it become part of your job or what your work?
Sure. Yeah. I think that goes back to me being a really scared kid. Fear of the unknown, fear of the paranormal, but also really, really into it and really, really fascinated by it. At first, I think it was the idea that if I understood it more, then I would be less afraid of it. And that did happen. The more I learned, the more I wanted to, the less I was afraid. The more I was okay with you just being a part of that community, I guess. And then it really turned into a way for me and you and as part of the business to share with people and to help people. I think understanding the paranormal the way that we do, the way that we've been fortunate enough to, we're able to help people in a really unique way. And so, helping normalizing the paranormal and normalizing paranormal experiences has become a really big, important part of our lives. And it's always really rewarding to tap into somebody who has a big fear of spirits or experiencing a spirit. And then, going through a tour with us or doing an investigation or just a conversation, having a conversation, and then coming out of that and saying, wow, I get it. I understand a little bit more and I'm a little bit less afraid. That is why we do what we do. And I think that is ultimately why I love learning more and investigating the paranormal.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And for me, I think it really is about helping people. And sometimes, that's an emotional process for me as a psychic medium, definitely emotional. I try not to be that medium that goes into the coffee shop and tells, the barista, oh, you have your grandmother that's attached to you and gives you all this kind of background. I really try because I know how emotional that is. But there are times when I have spirits that are so strong in my ear that they just really want to be heard. They need healing. Their family needs healing. And it's so rewarding that I get to do that for people. And, for instance, I hardly ever do kind of cold readings for somebody, right one-on-one, just because it's such an emotional thing for them often. But I had this one elderly gentleman who had passed over, and he was trying to talk to me, and he was demanding that I talk to his granddaughter. And he just kept bugging me. So finally, I went over to her, and it was kind of fortunate for me that I actually knew who it was. But I went over and I said, hey, this is going to sound super weird, but I have a message for you, and it's from the other side. I have your grandfather here, and he just wants me to tell you this. And what he asked me to tell her was, thank you for the pecan pie. And I had no idea what that meant. Like, I thought that was absolutely crazy. Like, thank you for the pecan pie. Like, where'd you get that from? But I tell her this, and she just starts literally crying so much. Just this profuse crying, and she tells me, you don't know how much that means to me. Last week, I went to the cemetery. I was really, really having trouble, and I needed his help. And I took him a piece of pecan pie. And hearing that, thank you for the pecan pie, it just makes everything better. And so that's what I like about the paranormal. That's why I do this, is I literally get to hopefully help people to bridge, some of these emotional gaps and make things better, and, kind of comfort the living as best as possible. But I think it's really just about helping people and seeing the beauty in that other side. I'm not one of those people like, oh, I'm like super dark and creepy. I think part of me is, but I think part of me just really loves the paranormal because I can find so much love in that community. So
for sure,
I love that.
Definitely. And I think, like, looking back at our conversation about children and childhood fears, one of my favorite things about our tours is when we have young children and they're just so attentive and asking questions. Like, we get the best questions from young people. Like, they're just so curious and open. And thinking back to, like, your situation as a young boy and being kind of in a way shamed by your gifts. And I think it's been so wonderful to be able to encounter young people who want to learn more about the paranormal, but then also to meet young people who are gifted and whose parents are, we just wanted to learn a little bit more about it, or asking us questions about that stuff, and then them leaving the tour or our conversation, and then, they have a little bit of a better toolkit to guide their growth.
Yeah, I think sometimes you need validation, and I think that's why we have a spirit world, because there is that need for validation, and the spirits can often offer that. Terry, you have a wonderful question here. Do you believe spirits haunt cemeteries? I think they can. I don't think all spirits do, but I definitely think they can. I want to share a little experience that I had last year with a cemetery and a spirit, and we were out doing kind of a spirit communication workshop in a cemetery, and we had a small group of people, and we were trying to do a session, a spirit communication session, both with a audio recorder doing an EVP and with using divining rods, and we basically asked a spirit to spell out its name using yes or no with the divining rods. We got a name, and then we asked, can you show us where you're buried? And literally the rods led us to where this spirit was buried. And we see, we see the name. It matches what we had. The rods lead us directly to it. It was just so strong. You could just feel this energy, this intense energy. And earlier in the spirit communication session, we asked, how old were you when you died? And the spirit responds, 3. When we look at the gravestone, it said that, this was that of a child, and the child was born 1 year and died the exact same year. So we're thinking, gosh, what does 3 mean? So I went up and I looked up city records, and I found this person and, the plot. 3 meant 3 days. And that spirit was just 3 days old when it departed. And it was just really beautiful and intense, and it's just really, really special. And I think, spirits can haunt a cemetery, and they don't always, spirits sometimes stay where they're comfortable. I kind of joke that I probably would haunt the cemetery because I love taking walks in the cemetery. Literally,
Yes.
every morning I go to the cemetery, and that's where I do my exercise, and I take a 2-mile walk, and I have it timed out. I know exactly what I'm doing, but it's just such a quiet and beautiful place that I think that's where I would go if I was going to haunt something. I don't see it as a sad place.
Yeah.
It's really a quiet and beautiful place. So thank you, Terry, so much for that question. But I now have a question for you, Stephen. Since we are a married couple, we've talked about the fact that the paranormal brought us together. Can you tell everybody a little bit about how that happened?
Sure. So, we always tell people that, our mutual love and respect for the paranormal is what brought us together. And I think, looking back to our first date, and it didn't really come up until the very end. And you had expressed that I think I maybe had even seen a deck of your tarot cards. Mm-hmm. And I maybe asked you if you read, and you said yes, that was it. And you said yes, and I was just so intrigued by that. And I thought, like, wow, here's this guy, I never had my cards read. I've always really been into that stuff, and I always knew that there's people out there who are gifted, and there's things that are out there that I don't understand. And so I was just really intrigued, and I really wanted to learn more. And so I asked you to read my cards, or maybe you asked me if you wanted to.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so that's it. So I asked you to read my cards, and then you did. And it was just like a really accurate, and I think it was just like a where you are in your life reading, and who you are and things like that. And it was just super accurate. You got me like really on point of who I was, like what my character was, my personality traits, but then also the place that I was in. And I was in the transition stage. I was, starting a new job and growing a little bit more professionally, and you just read me. And then knowing that part of you was really, really special, like especially on our first date. I thought, it was something that kind of confirmed my lifetime of curiosity, because I never really experienced the paranormal, in the extent that you had or
Sure.
that other people had. I always had other people tell me stories about those things. But at the same time, I always knew there's something out there, there's things out there. And meeting you really confirmed that. And I think that's what drew me to you. And then we went from there. And we wanted to learn more together, and we did. And we want to experience more together, and we did. And here we are, six years later, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And we have another great question from King. And the question is, do you use Ouija boards? Gosh, what a great question. And I think, a lot of people are really scared of them, and I get it. I get being scared of them. But I don't share the same kind of fear. I don't share that at all. I can embrace the use of a spirit board or a Ouija board very easily. I think it's really about respect. And if you want to communicate with spirits, I think anybody can. It doesn't matter if you're a psychic or a medium or clairvoyant or a psychic medium. Everybody has these gifts. They're part of our subconscious. And I think that if we approach these with respect, with love, with patience, with peace, we can use these kinds of tools to open up a world that is really quite remarkable. We can do that safely. And I just tell people two things, and they're real easy. It's got to be respectful. Like, you're in somebody else's world. You just got to treat them with respect. And then, I grew up, and my grandmother always told me, before you go into a room, you need to knock on the door. And so that idea of saying hello, of just like, hi, I'm here, greeting the spirits is really important. And then the idea of also saying goodbye, being respectful and saying goodbye, I think really ensures that there is a possibility of having a good communication session. Now, if people are scared about using these kinds of things, I encourage you never to do so, because that fear is what I think can create a problematic experience for a lot of folks. But if you come from a place without fear and from a place of love and respect and peace and patience, I think it's great. Thank you, King, so much for that question. It's a good one, and I appreciate you. I have one last question for you, Stephen, and it's, can you just share with us a story of the paranormal from growing up as a kid?
Sure. I had a lot of stories. There were more things that people told me about, and experiences that they had. And then we also have a really rich, oral storytelling community here. And I think, like, a lot of people tell urban legends. Like, there's a lot of urban legends in San Antonio, so I grew up around those. But probably some of my favorite stories were really coming from my dad. And they weren't so much about, like, ghosts or anything like that, but it was kind of like the magnificent feats of the human spirit. So these were like stories of extreme strength and things like that. You hear the story about the mother who lifts the car off of her child that's crushed, and he would tell several versions of these stories, and I never knew if they were true or not, but I always was so fascinated by them. And one of my favorites was he told me that he had been in a grocery store with my grandmother at the time, and she was already kind of older. And they were checking out of the grocery store. They're in line, and then all of a sudden, one of the fluorescent bulbs from the ceiling kind of falls down, and he grabs it right before it hits my grandmother on the head. And he carefully places it onto the ground. And then, of course, the nearest employee is freaking out. He's apologizing. He's so terrified that this happened, and he tries to grab the fluorescent bulb that my dad just caught from the ground, and he expressed that it was so hot. How did you grab that? There's no way. This is still hot. It's scorching. And my dad, just replied, it wasn't hot to me. And I remember growing up, my dad telling me that story, and I would ask him whenever we had like people over or there was a party, and we all had a couple of drinks in us. I would ask him to tell that story, and it was just something that it felt good. You were talking about my dad, the superhero, and it wasn't necessarily so much about the scary things, but it was the feats of the human spirit. Like, that's a really kind of paranormal thing in a way.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's just really special. I think childhood ghost stories, when we get these and we remember them, gosh, it's such a remarkable thing. The stories of our dads and our grandfathers and and our uncles and our aunts and moms, like, it just leaves us with a profound sense of perhaps what life is. And I always end our tours with, what I love about sharing those stories is that I get to share hope. Hope that there's something beyond this world. Hope that we have something to look forward to when we cross over. And I just love that story about your dad. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
I had a lot of stories. I had a wonderful grandfather who really raised me, and he was a magnificent storyteller. But this was a story that was ongoing that he would tell me. And this was a hump that he experienced while I was growing up, probably from the age of maybe 7 to 8. And he called this the Lady in Black. And my grandfather was really questioning kind of life at this point. In some respects, he was getting older. He was questioning his health and questioning, what spirituality meant. And he had read the Bible profusely and tried to make sense of it, and it didn't all make sense to him. And he was struggling. And this entity started coming to him in the middle of the night when he couldn't sleep. And he would say that he would walk to the living room, he would sit down on his recliner, and then the lady in black, she was always dressed in black, she would come through the doorway, and she would just sit on the sofa next to him. And they would begin a conversation. And the conversations were always about life, and they were always kind of troubling, and they were always very bizarre. But he described this like so often. These stories just kept coming up, and it was like the lady in black would visit him at least twice a week, and it was almost like the saga growing up. I always like, what's the next story of the lady in black? I think that's what got me hooked in some ways to sharing stories. But what got strange about it is that we all in the house started experiencing things. We started, experience that the toilet was flushing on its own, that the water would turn on in front of us and nobody was touching it. We would get like bizarre knocks in places, and and this went on like I would say maybe 6 months to a year. It was a decently long experience, and I remember once my grandmother really didn't talk about ghosts that often for whatever reason, but there was this one time that she told me something about the lady in black. She said, that she had this experience, and supposedly my grandfather was sitting down in his recliner in their bedroom, and he was reading the paper, which he always did. And he was reading the paper, and all of a sudden he tells my grandmother, she's here. The lady in black is here. Can you see her? And my grandmother said, no, I don't see anything. And as soon as she said that, the bed next, like the bed that she was sitting on, went down as if somebody sat right next to her. And he then said, she's sitting right next to you. And as soon as this happened, as soon as my grandfather acknowledged the lady in black, she disappeared that evening. She didn't return for a while, but she returned probably a couple of weeks or months later. My grandparents had went on a retreat. It was a couple's retreat that was about an hour away from our home. And while they were at this retreat, they had their own kind of little room, cabin kind of thing, where they had their bed and then they had their own private bathroom. And it was after hours. The retreat had, finished for the evening, and they were in their room, and my grandfather needed to use the restroom. And he needed to pee really bad, he said. And so he went over to the restroom, and it's locked. And he tries to open it. He uses the room key, for their little room. Nothing will open the door, and he's like freaking out because he's at this like really nice retreat center. He doesn't want to just like be outside and embarrass himself in case somebody notices. And so he begins looking for one of the nuns that are running the retreat center. He's looking all over. He spends like 30, 40 minutes like in desperate need to use the restroom. He can't find any restroom that's open, and he's panicking. And all of a sudden, the woman in black appears to him. And she says, why are you being so silly? And he said, I'm not being silly. I need to go to the restroom. And she responds, well, you've had the key in your pocket the entire time. And he says, I only have my car key in my pocket. I don't know what you're talking about. She said, that's the key. Use your car key. It'll open the restroom. So he used his car key. And it did open up the restroom. So then the woman in black appears to him later again that night. And he finally tells her, it's one thing for you to come and visit me at my house, but it's another thing that you follow me, almost an hour away from where I live. My wife is here. I'm on a retreat. I'm supposed to be doing things for my wife and for myself, and you're not welcome here. You're no longer ever, I don't want to ever see you again. And he said from that moment forward, he never saw the lady in black again. But the interesting thing about the lady in black is, throughout our research, especially in the area of South Texas and Central Texas, we have found many men who have experienced the lady in black. And it always seems like she comes at a time in these men's life where they're struggling with something, struggling with life, relationships, something. And she seems that she creates a little bit of chaos along the way. I have probably talked to at least 10 gentlemen who have had experiences with the lady in black, and that's kind of one of the most interesting childhood memories that I have, and it's one that even though it's kind of creepy, I really hold on to because one, it was just so bizarre, and that I couldn't let it go, and then I experienced that haunt where things were turning off and on, and it was just a weird time. But also because my grandfather was an amazing storyteller, and I love holding on to his memories, and I think perhaps that's how we are haunted as children and adults the most, by the memories that we carry with us throughout our lifetime. And I think that is probably the most profound thing about the paranormal and about childhood, is the memories that we'll carry with us and how they will continue to haunt us. Thank you all so much. Thank you for people who were in the chat room posting and with their kind comments. We really, really appreciate you. We've had so much fun. Well, thank you so much for letting us share. Please join us on October the 15th. We're going to skip a week for Canadian Thanksgiving, but on October 15th we will be back, and we will have a new episode, and that episode will be about haunted bars across America. And I think that should be a lot of fun. You can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We are Curious Twins Paranormal. Thank you, and good night.
You have been listening to Talking to the Dead with Fred. You can join us at aboveparanormal.com. If you have a story to share, or if you feel like you have no one to talk to, please visit us at aboveparanormal.com. Feel free to share it with our community in our open forums.